Hey everyone, it's Sammy here. I've completed the second set of Twisted Metal playthroughs with Twisted Metal 2, so now's the time to do my thoughts on the game. I had a more pleasant experience overall than Twisted Metal 1, even if some things still frustrate me about this game. I already mentioned previously that I grew up on Twisted Metal 2, which in retrospect was a very good thing, as all the TM games after TM2 would use TM2 as the foundation of their gameplay, while TM1 remains as just a unrefined prototype of sorts. That being said, nostalgia does not cloud my judgment here, as TM2 is not my favorite or personal number 1 TM game, but it's at least a very strong number 2. While there's a few flaws in TM2, a good number of flaws in the game that I'll get to in a moment will likely fall under nitpicks more so than being actual flaws of the game. A little history lesson of my first exposure to TM2 and some other stuff. My dad got me a PS1, this was back in 1997 or 1998 I think, and I got a couple of PS1 games, Crash Bandicoot 2, Crash Bandicoot 3, Twisted Metal 2, I think some demos discs here and there. I didn't really have a large selection of PS1 games, and while I would get some PS1 games later, I didn't really grow my library much. If I had to pick one PS1 game I probably played the most, TM2 was probably dirt or so. Back then though, YouTube was not really a thing. Instead, the internet provided a wonderful resource called GameFAQs and dedicated sites that compiled info on Twisted Metal. One of my fondest memories was this website that was created in GeoCities, which served as a guide on Twisted Metal 2. And apart from GameFAQs, there was also IGN and NeoSeeker, which I used to look up cheat codes and other hints and tips on Twisted Metal 2. A lot of my game time when I first started playing Twisted Metal 2 was just randomly messing with the game and trying to get a feel for it, since I didn't really know anything about it. I remember being surprised when I initially summoned a green dome bubble around me, and I also took note of the blue energy balls that enemies fired, which trapped me in ice. So I kept trying to mess with the controls and see how I could do those things. It wouldn't be until I got onto those aforementioned websites that I found out that there was something called advanced attacks, and what those things turned out to be were freeze blasts and shields. I got the PS1 games from my dad as a bunch of discs with no game box or instruction manual, so without the internet I would have not known anything about energy moves. I had some fun times doing co-op with my sister, whose first character of choice was Axel, and Axel was an instant favorite that she would main him whenever we played Twisted Metal 2 together. I can't remember the first character choice I went with. I might have picked Roadkill simply because he was the first character in the car select screen. And it'll be some point later where I think reading guides online helped influence my choice towards Warthog being my favorite character. I did also enjoy Mr. Grimm when I played as him, and was in awe of the damage of his special. And at one point I remember reading stuff online about a Dark Tooth and wasn't given the impression that this Dark Tooth was a boss. So I wrote down various cheat codes and passwords onto a notebook, entered the password to access Dark Tooth with Mr. Grimm, then was holding my breath in anticipation, only to hear the Twisted Metal 2 theme blasting and a large black ice cream truck with a giant head come barreling towards me with a sweet tooth laugh. I was metaphorically my pants at the sight of Darktooth, and needless to say, I lost all my lives as Grimm very quickly. Darktooth ended up giving me nightmares for a while, and it took me braving against him a couple of times as Warthog to finally get over it later. It's funny in hindsight when considering that in all the gameplay footage I've uploaded of this game, Darktooth is pretty much last season for me, especially when I face him as Grimm, as my spawns of Grimm usually tend to put me close to Darktooth, or right in front of me, allowing me to take cheap shots at him before he gets to move or fight back. But I still think he's the best boss in the series despite this. Anyway, I've gone way off track of my history lesson. My opinion on Twisted Metal 2, now that I've played it in its entirety properly with all the characters, is that it's still easily one of the strongest TM games in the series and a contender for best, to the point that some of its flaws can be overlooked to an extent. The reason why it's not my number 1 is because black exists. The main issue is primarily the stun lock in this game, which can get over the top crazy, making you die very easily. Free spam from characters like Slam, Grimm, and Roadkill is an obvious culprit, but apart from that, many weapons in this game have some kind of effect to disorient or knock your vehicle around. The only things that just hit you for damage and don't do anything else after that are fire missiles, machine guns, Warhawk special, Hammerhead special to an extent, and Dumper special. While the AI isn't fully coordinated like later TM games to come after you, you can always be certain to die with little chance of getting away if you get hit by a stun weapon while in the middle of the pack, especially in later levels where the AI will likely ramp up their behavior to be extremely irritating or dangerous. It's incredibly easy to die in this game off of one stun lock, if only someone like Minion being able to survive it somewhat. It's a lot like having touch of death combos from fighting games. Nearly any weapon hit will allow you to incapacitate the enemy and put them into a death trap, but conversely, the enemy can also do the same to you. Later TM games would minimize the amount of stun lock or mitigate it to the point that you at least have a chance of survival. It's actually quite amusing when compared to TM1, where freeze missiles don't stack their effects. An enemy can only be refrozen once they're out of the frozen state, so you're doing nothing but wasting freeze missiles if you're using them on an enemy that's already frozen. TM3 and 4 do have freeze stun locks, but that's the worst of their stun locks, and it's still nowhere near the insanity of stun locks in TM2. Plus, the overall time to kill in those games doesn't compare to TM2. Note that one thing I'll never mention as an issue in any TM game is enemies having infinite weapons or specials. The annoyance of them largely comes down to their overall AI behavior as opposed to having infinite weapons. For instance, Outlaw in TM2 primarily uses her special whenever you're close to her, and if she needs a long-range option, she uses fire missiles. She might spend most of the level running away, and if she's the last enemy, that might be when she'll switch gears to hunt you down personally. If you keep your distance from her, she is hardly a threat. Outlaw could be an annoying enemy, but having infinite weapons is not part of the reason for that. So, another flaw besides the stun lock is the lower frame rate. TM2 is the first game to introduce energy moves, and TM2 runs at a max of 20 FPS. This sometimes results in unresponsive energy move inputs, which is particularly killer if you intend to use shields against freeze spam, for instance. TM1 also ran at 20 FPS max, but apart from car handling, there's nothing else about it gameplay-wise that would make a higher frame rate necessary. The core of TM2 and later TM games is energy moves to supplement combat with other weapons, and apart from Small Brawl, which also runs at 20 FPS, every Twisted Metal game since 3 onwards has run at 30 FPS and up. Synergy between weapons and energy moves is a particularly huge part of TM2, where certain characters can make use of it to devastating effect, like Twister with mines. If you're not able to execute energy moves despite the correct inputs, this shouldn't be a difference between life and death. Freezes are generally thought of as a tool to initiate offensive maneuvers against an enemy, but they can still be used in a defensive manner by freezing enemies if you need to shut off an enemy with a long duration special like Twisters, keep Axel or Outlaw from bum rushing you to spam their specials, or to make a getaway. Even a freeze input failing can make a difference between life and death, and it's usually the one command input that rarely fails to activate in this game. I get that I can't dog on the game because it's a PS1 game, and getting Twisted Metal 2 up and running stably and smoothly at a reasonable frame rate is probably far more important. But remember, Twisted Metal is a series meant to be akin to a fighting game with cars instead of people. I think anyone would be extremely peeved to not be able to play to the best of their abilities if their inputs are not responding properly, and not being able to execute moves on command in a reliable and consistent manner can be frustrating. That's really the two big flaws of TM2. Any other flaw I mention after this point would probably fall under nitpicking. For instance, a lack of unlockables, especially after having played 4 onwards. At least with TM2 though, level exploration was encouraged in order to find secrets like codes for secret characters and levels. Some of the handling feels loose, possibly due to the physics, and if cars being able to flip and roll over, plus the stun locking, it sometimes feels like you are made to have less control over your vehicle at times. No save game function to make it so that you don't have to keep inputting codes every time you boot up the game, especially for Sweet Tooth and Minion, is another nitpick. Locking the secret levels to 2-player versus only seems unusually restrictive, considering how 2 of those are TM1 levels and they work perfectly fine in the context of single-player death matches. If only Suicide Swamp arguably making more sense as a 2-player versus level with how small it is. And then one more nitpick is level passwords are unique per character instead of being a universal across the board like TM1. Other than that, TM2 is probably as close to a flawless TM game as it can possibly get in terms of gameplay. The cast of vehicles and drivers is arguably the most iconic and popular, especially with newcomers like Axel, Shadow, Twister, and Slam. Plus, this game featured voice acting and the comic book styled endings, with the debut of Mel McMurrin as the iconic voice of Calypso, and a number of great endings like Roadkill, Minion, and Grasshopper. The special weapons are the most diverse in this game, with only arguably one overlap in the form of Warthog and Minion, and every vehicle plays uniquely to each other. Only Hammerhead sucks, but the other vehicles all offer their own fun gameplay. Even weaker vehicles like Grasshopper can output huge damage, and she is probably intended to be the joke character of the game, with how her special deliberately puts her into harm's way and can be cancelled out by getting hit with one non-machine gun weapon. The weapon selection is cleaned up from TM1, with every weapon being strictly damage related and having their own niche. Plus, the icons are larger and more distinct compared to TM1's. This game debuted the Napalm, the Ricochet Bomb, and the Remote Bomb, and an early version of the environmental weapon in the form of Lightning. Lightning is kind of useless, but the other three weapons are very good, being capable of big damage, or in the case of the Ricochet Bombs, being involved in stun locks and also blasting enemies off New York and Antarctica. This game has the best version of the Ricochets, and it's interesting how some bosses in the series will get a unique version of the Ricochet as one of the weapons they use. The World Tour setting allows for more creative and deeper levels compared to TM1, and arguably even compared to later TM games. Los Angeles, Paris, New York, Holland, and Hong Kong are all favorites of mine, and even Moscow, Amazonia, and Antarctica have their charms. The complaints I have about the levels is certain things, like the placement of Moscow in tournament mode. As a second level, it's kind of unforgiving, and you would need to have gone into it with a couple weapons stockpiled from LA to get through it in one piece. Antarctica breaks apart way too quickly. It's probably the most unique level in the entire series for being a level with a built-in quote-unquote battle royale function in the form of parts of the level dropping off to the ocean, which narrows the playing field and will force you into a confrontation with your opponents on a smaller area. Some of the parts breaking is over time, but some parts just immediately start breaking the moment you pass over them, like the area with the 3 missiles. It's one of the first parts of the level likely to go. It's a difficult level to enjoy in a deathmatch setting because the levels don't reset too fresh with each go in deathmatch, so you're now just fighting it out over one small area with nothing else around. I love Holland, but will admit that it is a nightmare in a tournament setting due to a lack of cover, and the magic distance only applying to enemies, which means enemies can freely hit you at any distance on the map, while you have to charge at them and quickly thin the herd to improve your chances of survival. Else, you'll get killed 9 times over by the 9 enemies on this map and game over very quickly. Plus, the windmills are too brittle and get destroyed very quickly. Other than that, the level selection is one of the best, and the accompanying soundtracks to each level also help to make them very memorable. I remember Los Angeles making a huge impression on me when I first played TM2 back then. The level and the rocking soundtrack for it made for a killer combination. Minion and Darktooth are both fun bosses, even with me casually dispatching Darktooth these days like it's routine. But he's still a very impressive boss with a lot of unique behavior coded for a level you fight him in. He also has a lot of weapons to work with on top of that. Many bosses in the TM series are largely a what you see is what you get type deal, and usually they aren't coded to use a lot of weapons besides their special. For a PS1 era TM boss, Darktooth has a good number of weapons to use, which includes his unique ice cream cone machine guns, his flaming head, his clown ricochet bombs, the occasional fire and homing missiles, and when he's near you, he'll try to jump on your vehicle like he wants to teabag it. Then of course, him being a large vehicle and ramming being a prominent form of attack in TM2, he effectively has 6 weapons to use, and if you count freezes as another weapon, then that's 8 weapons. That's a large arsenal for a Twisted Metal boss. Then there's his behavior in certain areas of Hong Kong. The most obvious notable behavior is him going to one of these subway entrances and spamming Rico bombs if you're in the subway. His jumps are much higher in order for him to clear the subway entrance ramps, while their normal height in all other instances. If you're in the waterfront area, you only venture a certain part of the roadways before jogging back so that he doesn't risk jumping over the gates into the water, given how fond he is of jumping around. If you're in a temple, he'll drive towards the middle entrance of the temple and teleport in, since his vehicle is too big to drive into the entrances normally, and he'll also teleport out after a moment when you leave the temple. Sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, you might actually try to force his way through the entrance of it if it's him attempting to exit the temple, especially if you're doing the cheese strategy of camping at a specific temple entrance to take easy pot shots at him. All these unique behaviors coded for the level you fight him in is very impressive for a PS1 game, and no other boss featured since Darktooth have had the same kind of approach to their behavior. Of course, once you get down the science of Darktooth, you can use it to manipulate the fight in your favor and control Darktooth's behavior, which is very useful for speedruns. If there's one smaller grievance I have with this game, it's that pedestrians can eat your shots, which means potentially wasting a missile if you don't clear the roads of pedestrians. I have to remind myself a few times to shoot or run those pricks over so that my homing missile doesn't blow them to bloody chunks instead of the enemy. For the TM2 playthroughs, I did all of them on medium difficulty. Despite playing TM2 for a fair bit of my life since childhood, I haven't really properly played every character until now, and it was a thrilling experience, especially after incorporating newfound knowledge like secret heals, mine usage for things like Twister and Grasshopper Special, Axel's ram spam, bumping into enemies to sort of put them in an aerial state for remote bombs to achieve additional damage, and some other stuff. Before that, I was happy to have made 2 discoveries on my own, which included being able to manipulate Roadkill's boomerang flight path like AI Roadkill, and Darktooth being so large that he can spam remote bombs when he's on top of you, since the remote bombs get planted into his vehicle instead of dropping to the ground, which naturally made it my go-to means of destroying him. There were a lot more fun characters than I realized when I stepped outside my Warthog and Minion comfort zone, with Twister and Shadow moving up my fun factor list. I'd say Holland partly got point stock once I realized just how much of a death sentence it could be at times, especially on hard difficulty. Though otherwise, I still enjoyed every level in this game, grievances and all. Although save files and later TM games made passwords irrelevant, I do miss the idea of level passwords and just being able to skip to a level you want to play on. While I cannot play a version of Darktooth with the head, I think he manages to escape being a novelty thing just due to the fact that all the weapons you use with him get a damage boost for some reason, and he can deal massive ran damage, plus has massive armor, so he's still very fun to play, and his large size is an interesting challenge to tackle on certain levels like New York, giving TM2 just a little more replay value. There's also the Edge Blah mod, which has a number of changes to give TM2 another round of replay value. So yeah, overall, not a lot of complaints about Twisted Metal 2. It gets a very strong 9 out of 10 for me. That's the gameplay and commentary. Hope you enjoyed it, and Insanity is out.